Hello everybody, welcome to another Goosebumps episode review. I'm going to be splitting this video into two parts because this is one of the two-parters, and this is my favorite episode. This is called The Attack of the Mutant. It's based on the book of the same name. And in terms of the series, this is Season 2, Episode 2 and 3, so both episodes make up one episode each, although they're part of the same story, obviously. And this is notable for not really being a scary episode. This is more of a comedic episode. I guess more of a superhero comedy? It's hard to explain. It's not really scary like most of the other episodes are. It does have some creepy moments, but otherwise it's just kind of a lighthearted, fun kind of episode. It's not really meant to be taken seriously, which makes sense if you read the book, which is kind of the same. There are some changes. But yeah, this is part one, so this is pretty important for the story. We do have some cast members. This isn't like a huge story. I'm only going to mention three characters because, the other characters don't really matter too much, but they are in it, if that makes sense. So we do have Dan Worry Smith as Skipper Matthews, who is this really kind of he's a 12-year-old comic book geek, and he's the main character of this episode. We have Melissa Bathory as Libby, who shows up later. And then we have Scott Wickware as the Masked Mutant, who is the villain for this episode. And also I wanted to mention briefly, Dan Worry Smith in this episode, he plays Skipper, but he also shows up again in Goosebumps as Seth Gold in the episode Click, which is in season 3. So yeah, I just wanted to mention that. I did review that episode if you're interested. Anyway, I did take notes for the first time. Make it that way you will. So yeah, I did take notes. I kind of made little bullet points and stuff so I can go through the episode. There will be spoilers for both episodes in these two videos, so if you haven't seen it, you may want to watch them and then come back. So I just wanted to mention that because there's major spoilers ahead. Anyway, let's start. So we do open with Skipper and his comic book obsession, and he's on his bed. He's in his room, which is covered in just comic book characters and just villains and just comic, nerd stuff everywhere, which is not too dissimilar to my own room. Although I am not a comic book nerd, not really, not as much as I used to be. But anyway, so Skipper collects comics. His parents don't approve. And I just wanted to mention, the parents are very, I don't want to be like mean, but the parents in this episode are very stereotypically 90s parents. Like, obviously this is a show from 1996, so it kind of makes sense, but it's a little silly that the mom is very overprotective and very you have to see the episode. She's very kind of overly sweet. That's all I'll say. She's a good actress. I'm just saying that she just seems a little over the top for this episode, kind of like a comic book, which I guess is the point. And the dad is probably even more over the top than the mom is, and he really does not like comic books. In fact, he doesn't approve of Skipper reading them at all. And so that's like a running joke, is him always catching Skipper, reading comics when he's not supposed to be, and that's a thing that's honestly kind of funny. It's just fun to watch. So he's funny. Also, the dad looks a lot like George McFly for whatever reason. So I found that funny. A few other reviewers have also said that. So it just seems kind of weird, kind of similar. Anyway, so the parents don't approve, and so Skipper goes to the local middle school, and so he has this weird friend named Wilson. And Wilson is a strange kid. He collects these weird rocks, and he's very obsessed with rocks for some reason. And so that is his whole character. It's just him and rocks, and that's the only thing that's interesting. And so he is best friends with Skipper for whatever reason, and Skipper doesn't approve of the rocks. He thinks they're stupid, and then Wilson doesn't approve of comic books. He thinks they're stupid. So we don't really know why they're friends, but okay. And Wilson doesn't really do much in these episodes. In fact, he's just kind of there as a friend for Skipper, because I think if he wasn't there, then Skipper would just have Libby, who doesn't show up until later. Um, well, she's introduced later, but I'm just saying it's a little interesting that Wilson is just here, and every time he's on screen, he just talks about his rocks, and even Skipper's dad says he's strange, which kind of is. But yeah, Wilson's he's there. They have some good conversations, but he's just like a thing. So he doesn't do much, but he's just here, so he's okay. And so later that day, Skipper goes to the bus, so he has an orthodontist appointment, and kind of later in the day, and it's in this kind of darker part of town, like this more, I guess, ghetto part of town, you could say. And so he takes the bus. One thing I want to mention with the bus has Goosebumps advertisements, which I think is really clever and also very over the top and very self-aware. And I just wanted to mention that because that was cool to me. Because they're, making fun of themselves, I guess. And so that was cool. But later on the bus, Skipper meets this girl named Libby, who is seen here in this picture you're seeing. So this is from that scene where they're on the bus. So Skipper's reading his Masked Mutant comic, I should say. I didn't even mention the comic books that Skipper loves are the Masked Mutant. That's what I should have mentioned before. So yeah, he reads a bunch of comics. Silver Swan, he mentions that. Avenging Eagle, he also mentions in part 2. But the Masked Mutant is his favorite one, his favorite series. And so the mutant is this evil supervillain, and he fights the Galloping Gazelle. We'll get to that later. But he's reading the comic, and then this girl Libby is wondering where he's going. He says he's going to the orthodontist, but he stops himself. He's like, "That's too." He's like, "No." And then he says he's going to the comic book store. And so she's like, "You're into comics?" And he's like, "Yeah." And then he's like, "Which comics do you read?" And then she is also into comic books, and she says she reads the High School Harry and Beanhead, which is probably a reference to the Archie comics, probably one of some of the older comic book series. And so he says those are trash, and then she notices he's reading the Masked Mutant, and he's like, "That's super," and she's like, "That's superhero junk." And then they start getting into like this kind of playful fight or debate, and so yeah, and then it turns out that they kind of become friends. And so before that, we saw this creepy guy in purple with a cape on top of the bus, which this is supposed to be the Masked Mutant's first appearance in the episode, and it's actually kind of creepy. So yeah, he laughs maniacally, which is a running theme with this actor that plays him, and that was great. And so yeah, he just kind of shows up on the bus on the top, and then he just disappears. Anyway, Skipper heads off to his appointment, but then he misses it because he went into the wrong, or he got off on the wrong stop. And so the bus leaves him there. And so he meets this old man hold on, am I getting things right? Sorry, I'm getting a little sidetracked. Anyway, so he goes to his orthodontist appointment. I guess, wait, it's not really clear if he misses it. I think it's the next day. It's the next day. And so he's supposed to get off on that street where it's at. So he misses it, and then he looks and he sees the Masked Mutants headquarters, which is this big purple building that's kind of shining, and he thinks it's real. And then he talks to an older man who comes over and says this. He's like, Skipper's like, is there? Hold on, I might be getting this wrong. Sorry, that's later in the episode. Anyway, sorry about that. So he sees the mutant headquarters, and then the next day, Wilson, of course, in his infinite wisdom, he thinks it's the artist of the comic, and he thinks that he stole the design for his series. If that makes any sense. So that was kind of pointless. Wilson doesn't really do much, again, like I said. But yeah. So later on, his dad catches Skipper late at night reading The Masked Mutant, and then he tries to fool his dad by putting it into an algebra book, which actually kind of works. And so his dad is proud of him, and he said he doesn't know much algebra, but that he's glad Skipper is into it, and so of course it's just a not a prank, it's a trick. So he just continues reading that, and the next day, this is what I was talking about. The next day, Skipper goes to his orthodontist appointment, I believe, and so it's in the same part of town, and so he talks to this older man. This is where that scene is. He talks to the older man, and he's like, "There used to be a building right here. You used to see that. There's like this big building here. Have you seen it?" And then he talks to the man, and then the older man says, "No matter." Sorry, what was he saying? He's like, I'm sorry, I'm trying to remember what he said. He's like, "No wonder you're seeing stuff. This stuff will rot your mind." He says, that's what he says. And so that man walks off. He only part he has. And so the headquarters of the Masked Mutant has apparently disappeared. And so at this point, Libby shows up randomly, which is a little bit weird. And so she shows up, and they both are very confused. They're like, "Well, Skipper's like, I saw this building. It was here. Now it's gone." And then Libby shows up, and she's like, "Well, you're crazy. You're nuts." And so they both agree to, walk into um, walk and see if they can find the building. Am I getting things right? Sorry. Okay, so after that, I'm getting things a little bit mixed up here. Apologies for that. That doesn't happen until later. So anyway, Libby and Skipper go home. Libby has something to do, so she leaves. And so Skipper is alone there, so he has to get a ride back to his home. Later that night, he discovers a special edition comic has been mailed to him, and his mom gives it to him. And inside this new comic is the issue of the Masked Mutant, the newest version, or the newest issue, I should say. And in that issue, the mutant mentions he has an invisibility curtain over his headquarters. And so later that day, Libby and Skipper go to the part of town, and so that is where they both enter the invisibility curtain. They kind of walk where the headquarters would have been, and so it turns out that it's true. So the curtain is there, and the headquarters is hidden from everyone, basically, except for Libby and Skipper. So I think this is really cool. Libby name drops the name of the episode in the book when she says "Attack of the Mutant," and that's of course the name of the of both. So I found that really cool and kind of funny. And so yeah, that was interesting. And both enter the headquarters, and they kind of explore the inside of it, and it's very weird. The headquarters is very strange. It's almost like this big old kind of water bottle looking building where it's like purple and it's got like yellow, and it's very 90s. It is like very neon, very just over the top looking, because it's a comic book headquarters. It's supposed to be over the top and silly, and which it fits the episode, because the episode isn't scary. It's more like just fun, especially if you're a comic book nerd, then you get a lot out of this episode. Anyway, so this is kind of the end of this first part, and both parts are about 20 minutes. So they both enter the headquarters. It's kind of creepy. There's weird organ music playing, which I think is kind of, it makes it kind of funny. But anyway, I just thought it was a little bit funny that they played weird music. It doesn't really fit, but I guess it does because it's silly. Anyway, the headquarters is kind of creepy. They don't see the mutant for a long time. In fact, I think the mutant shows up a little bit here and there. He does show up in the bushes near the front of the school a couple times, and obviously on top of the bus. But he doesn't really show up really until part 2. That's when he gets his major appearance. But anyway, so they enter this crazy elevator, which shoots them down, and it closes them and locks them inside the building, and they try to escape. And then Skipper kind of gets scanned when they were first entering the building, which is very mysterious. And so, basically, Skipper enters this strange kind of white room, and so Libby disappears. And so he goes to look for her, and he finds this white room, kind of like this void, basically. And there's a bunch of art supplies on a table just sitting there. And so Skipper looks at this all this stuff, and it turns out that this basically what the stuff is art supplies, or I guess drawings and sketches of the Masked Mutants covers and the characters, and he finds himself in one of them, which he finds very strange. And then there are some kind of scary noises behind him, and so that's basically how this first part ends, is a kind of a jump scare moment. So Skipper is kind of looking through the drawings and stuff, and he's kind of nerding out, geeking out, you know. And then suddenly there is this scary noise behind him, kind of scary, like he thinks there's someone behind him, and so he's like, "Who's there?" And the episode kind of ends with this, jump scare moment, kind of the only scary moment in the episode. And so yeah, it's the Masked Mutant. Apparently, he's found Skipper, and it's like a scary moment, and that's how it ends. This first part at least. And so I think it's a good part. I like this episode. I really like it. I've seen it probably close to 7 or 8 times. It's just a very rewatchable episode, especially because I'm a big comic book fan. Not as much as I used to be, but I know a lot of the characters and stuff. Um, and I think it's cool that Goosebumps is kind of going into the comic book world a little bit. They've done that a few times, not too many times, but enough. And I think it's a good episode that's not scary. It's more just like silly, goofy, funny, fun, just over the top episode. It's not really meant to be serious. So I like that. I like the performances. I think Melissa Bathory, she does a great job as Libby. She doesn't get a lot to do, but I think she actually has quite a decent role, and she's pretty likable. And she, I guess, becomes Skipper's other good friend besides Wilson. Wilson is just like kind of awkward. He's just like, you can tell they're trying to make him like a stereotypical, um, kind of like just like a silly nerd. He's not really he doesn't really do anything. He's just like there. So yeah, he's the thing. He's fine. He has a weird fascination with rocks. Like, I like rocks, but why is he so fascinated with them? I don't know. It's kind of silly, kind of over the top. Um, Dan Worry Smith, he does a great job in this episode as Skipper. He's kind of just like fumbling his way through the episode. Like, things just happen to him, and he's just like either confused or a little nervous or just really geeking out. Mostly geeking out because it's the Masked Mutant, his favorite, series. So makes sense. The Masked Mutant doesn't have a huge role in this episode. You kind of just see him like in the shadows, I guess, and some little tiny glimpses of him, which I think is kind of good because it prepares you for the part two, which I think is the better. I think part two is the better part. Although this one kind of sets everything up, so it's kind of more important. But I think that the part two is better, in my opinion. I love all the comic book kind of stuff in this episode. It's great. I believe this is the only time that the Goosebumps show uses comic books. I'm pretty sure, because I think all the other episodes are just more scary, and they're not really, like this, which I think is fun. Um, and yeah, it's cool. I like the jump scare at the end. I like the design of the all the costumes, and I like Adam West in the beginning of the episode. Actually, has a voiceover cameo as the Galloping Gazelle, who is the arch enemy to the Masked Mutant, and we see them both later on. But I think it's cool that we get an early look at the Galloping Gazelle and the League of Good Guys as the local superheroes in this universe. I think it's cool. The parents are fine. As stereotypically 90s as they are, I think they're pretty enjoyable. Especially the dad, I think. He's just so, like, nerdy and awkward. Kind of like Skipper, kind of like Wilson. So I think he fits. And I like the small moments with the Masked Mutant. I think that's cool. It kind of sets up him later on to be a threat, which is cool. From what I've heard, I have read the book a couple times. I need to buy the book at some point because it's my favorite Goosebumps book. But I'm pretty sure that this episode is pretty faithful to the book for the most part. Obviously, they have to change some stuff, but I think it's pretty faithful, pretty accurate. Um, I like the 90s feel of this. Um, it doesn't look too cheap. I think probably the best effects are inside the mutants' headquarters, which is cool. I just like how um, comic book like it is, obviously, because it's supposed to be. I think they use the budget well, I think. Um, I don't know. I think it's one of the better looking episodes of the Goosebumps TV show. It's probably one of the better episodes. Um, if you're going for something scary, you're not really going to find it here. But I think if you want something fun and kind of original and just kind of silly and more over the top than anything, I think Attack of the Mutant, both parts, I think are very well done. And yeah, I have nothing really bad to say about this first part. Hopefully you enjoyed my narration. Sorry if it was a little bit jumbled. Um, just because I had to remember a little, remember some of the points and stuff. But we will take a look at part 2 and the next video. So hopefully you'll join me for that. And I will do future Goosebumps episode reviews as well. I'll probably review my top 10 in due time. But I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know, do you like Attack of the Mutant? Do you think it's one of the better episodes? Have you seen it? What do you think about it? Do you like the book? Which do you prefer? And what's your favorite Goosebumps episode? Let me know down below. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed. I will see you for the next part. Stay tuned for that. I will see you then. And take care. Have an awesome day.